When a marriage ends, most people think of division. The house, the accounts, the schedules, the hurt. But sometimes, in the rarest and darkest corners of human behavior, separation isn't about heartbreak. It's about calculation. Because for some, a clean break is not enough, only death guarantees the outcome they want. Shelley Danishefsky Kovlin was not just a working mother. She was a powerhouse. At 47, she was a senior financial advisor at UBS, trusted by clients with portfolios worth millions. She supported not only her children but her estranged husband as well. The apartment across the hallway, where that very husband lived, was paid for by her. Rod Kovlin had once worked on Wall Street. But by 2009, he was out of a job, gambling obsessively, and spending his time at the gym or competing in backgammon tournaments. He hadn't contributed financially in years. And although Shelley had filed for divorce and secured a protective order against him, she allowed him to remain close. For the children's sake. To make co-parenting easier. It was a choice born of compromise. It would become a fatal mistake. On the morning of December 31, 2009, the final day of the year, their 9-year-old daughter Anna walked into the bathroom and found her mother face down in the tub. The water was tinted with blood. Her mother wasn't moving. Panicked, Anna called for her father. Rod claimed he pulled Shelley from the water and attempted CPR. Paramedics arrived quickly. But something about the scene contradicted his story. Rod was completely dry. Not a drop on his shirt or sleeves. No wet footprints on the floor. Nothing to suggest he had just lifted a full-grown woman from a tub of water. Still, investigators focused elsewhere. Above the tub, a cabinet door hung off its hinges. It was enough for a theory. Shelley slipped, tried to steady herself, hit her head, fell unconscious, and drowned. The blood came from the head injury. An accident. A tragic misstep. Case closed. No autopsy was performed. Shelley was an Orthodox Jew, and traditional burial customs prohibit invasive procedures on the body. Rod pushed hard for a rapid burial. He even attempted to have Shelley's body flown to Israel, where American jurisdiction wouldn't reach. Under pressure, and wanting to honor their daughter's faith, Shelley's family agreed. Shelley was buried the next day, and her cause of death listed as undetermined. No deeper questions. No forensic answers. But Rod had already looked ahead. He had access to Shelley's emails. He knew she had a legal appointment scheduled for January 1. She was planning to sign a new will. And that new document would reduce his inheritance to a symbolic $1. Everything hinged on time. If Shelley lived one more day, Rod would lose everything. But if she died before that signature, he stood to inherit millions. Shelley was found dead just hours before the new year. In the final hours of 2009, Rod Kovlin gained what divorce court had nearly denied him: control, freedom, and money. Shelley's existing will, the one still in effect on the morning of her death, entitled Rod to roughly half of her estate. That meant more than $2.5 million, plus potential influence over the trusts set aside for their children. It was a fortune he didn't earn, and one that Shelley had intended to sever him from completely. She had already set the process in motion. Her legal appointment for January 1 was not just a meeting, it was liberation. The new will would cut Rod out entirely. Not reduce. Eliminate. $1. That's all he would have received had she lived to sign it. But Shelley never made it to that appointment. She died in her home, in a locked bathroom, less than 24 hours before that legal reset. And the man she feared, the man she had legally ordered to stay away, held the key. Literally. Rod still had access to her apartment. He lived only feet away, and he used that proximity to remain part of a life he had already lost. When Shelley allowed him to stay nearby for the sake of the children, she didn't just extend trust. She gave him opportunity. He didn't have to force entry. He didn't need to break down a door. He had a key. And he had a reason. He knew about the new will. He knew the clock was ticking. And he had hours left to stop the future from arriving. So when Shelley's lifeless body was found that morning, it wasn't just tragic. It was timely. In the days that followed, Rod did not behave like a man shattered by grief. During the mourning period, he wasn't weeping. He was asking questions, about bank accounts, about liquidity, about how soon he could access funds. His language was financial, not emotional. The loss of Shelley, to him, was a transaction. One that yielded results. But those closest to her, her parents, her family, her colleagues, couldn't shake what didn't make sense. Shelley wasn't frail. She wasn't sick. She was determined. Planning a fresh start. Taking back control of her life. People like that don't simply fall and drown in silence. And the timing? It wasn't coincidental. It was surgical. You don't die on the morning you're set to reclaim everything by accident. Not when someone stands to lose it all. 9 months passed. The world moved on. But grief, when tangled with suspicion, never settles. Shelley's parents had agreed to a swift burial under religious pressure, trusting that what happened was simply unexplainable. But over time, that trust unraveled. The details refused to fade. The dry clothes. The missing autopsy. The silence that followed. And most of all, the feeling that their daughter didn't fall, that she was pushed. So they made an agonizing decision. They went to court and requested an exhumation. It meant confronting their faith, the community, and their own heartbreak. It meant digging up not only a body, but a truth long buried. In October 2010, Shelley's remains were exhumed from her New Jersey grave. For the first time, her body was examined. What the medical examiner found rewrote everything. Shelley hadn't drowned because she slipped. She hadn't hit her head. She hadn't died by accident. The cause of death was now clear and chilling. She had been strangled. The bruising around her neck was no longer dismissed. It spoke, finally, with unmistakable clarity. This was homicide. Someone had overpowered her, forced her under, and made sure she never rose again. Rod's story about slipping and drowning shattered under the weight of medical fact. The cabinet, the cracked hinge, the tragic coincidence, all of it fell apart. Yet despite this new conclusion, Rod remained free. Because justice doesn't move with emotion. It moves with evidence. And much of it, thanks to the delayed autopsy, had already faded. The crime scene had been cleaned. No witnesses. No surveillance. No confession. What prosecutors had now was a timeline, a motive, a body that spoke, but no direct proof tying Rod to the moment Shelley's breath left her. Rod knew this. He stayed quiet. He raised their children. He waited. And all the while, the truth continued to build, out of reach, but not out of sight. Rod Kovlin wasn't simply hiding in the shadows. He was constructing a new stage, one where he could rewrite the past, reshape the truth, and tighten his grip on the only leverage he had left, his children. After Shelley's death, Rod maintained partial custody of Anna and her younger brother. He didn't just become their parent. He became their narrator. He told Anna that her mother had been unstable, that she had taken her own life, and that the world was unfairly blaming him. Over time, Rod isolated his daughter further, eventually pulling her from school to homeschool her himself. He didn't want her educated. He wanted her molded. But controlling a child wasn't enough. Rod was unraveling, and his next moves became darker, more desperate, and impossible to ignore. He began forging emails in Shelley's name, attempting to manufacture digital evidence suggesting she had been depressed in the days leading up to her death. The language was stilted, the tone all wrong. Investigators weren't fooled. But it showed something critical: Rod wasn't passive. He was actively engineering a false narrative to shield himself. Then came something worse. Rod began plotting to kill his own parents. In his mind, they were an obstacle. They had temporary custody of Anna while he faced mounting suspicion. If they were gone, he believed he could reclaim full control over his daughter, and possibly gain access to the remaining money. Rod confided in a girlfriend. He asked her to help find a hitman. She went to the police. With her cooperation, investigators gathered recordings and transcripts, documenting Rod's chilling plans. He spoke of making people disappear. Of knowing how to stay clean. Of getting away with more than one crime. Rod's world, once held together by silence and manipulation, began to collapse under its own weight. In 2015, he was finally arrested. But not for conspiracy. Not for forgery. Not for attempted murder. He was charged with what he thought he had buried forever. Second-degree murder in the death of Shelley Danishefsky Kovlin. By the time Rod Kovlin stood trial, nearly 10 years had passed since Shelley's death. A decade in which he believed time had worked in his favor. Memories fade. Evidence degrades. Stories blur. But what Rod never understood was that silence, when built on lies, doesn't erase the truth. It preserves it. Prosecutors didn't present the case as a single violent moment. They presented it as a chain. Every link mattered. The financial dependence. The gambling losses. The restraining order. The key he never returned. The will scheduled for the next day. Each fact alone raised questions. Together, they formed motives so clear it no longer needed speculation. Then came the voices Rod could not control anymore. Anna, no longer a frightened child, took the stand. She spoke carefully, but firmly. She described what she had seen that morning. Her mother in the tub. The blood in the water. And her father, moments later, dry. Completely dry. She told the jury how she had been coached over the years. How she was told what to say, what to remember, and what to forget. Her testimony didn't feel rehearsed. It felt carried. Like something held inside for too long. The defense tried to shift the narrative back to uncertainty. They questioned the delayed autopsy. They implied emotional instability. They suggested coincidence. But coincidence cannot explain planning. And it cannot explain behavior. One piece of evidence cut deeper than all the rest. Rod had written a private document, never sent, never meant to be read. In it, he described entering Shelley's apartment, confronting her, and holding her head underwater. The words weren't dramatic. They were disturbingly calm. Almost explanatory. As if he were justifying the inevitable. To the jury, it wasn't a confession screamed in panic. It was worse. It was a confession written in control. In September 2019, Rod Kovlin was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Not because justice moved quickly. But because it moved carefully. And because the truth, once spoken, refused to retreat. Justice often comes with a cost, and for Anna, the price was years of confusion, isolation, and betrayal by the one person who should have protected her most. Her childhood had been a quiet battlefield, her memories contested territory. The man who raised her, homeschooled her, and told her what to believe was also the man who stole her mother's life. After Rod's arrest, Anna was placed under the guardianship of Shelley's parents. It marked the beginning of a slow return to safety. A return to truth. She began to reclaim the story that had been twisted around her, to speak in her own voice, not the one fed to her. The healing was not instant. How could it be? Anna had lived within a fiction carefully built by someone with the patience to wait for silence to do his work. But silence didn't last. And when she stood in court and told the truth, she didn't just help convict her father. She restored her mother's memory. Shelley, in the years following her death, became more than a victim. She became a symbol of something urgent and often overlooked. That domestic abuse does not always scream. That danger can wear a smile. That trust can become a weapon when placed in the wrong hands. Her life was one of accomplishment, intelligence, and strength. She built a career based on trust and integrity, managing the wealth of others with care. She raised 2 children with discipline and love. She fought for her safety through the courts, scheduled her exit from a toxic marriage, and stood on the brink of a new chapter. And then, in a moment no one saw, that chapter was stolen. But what Shelley's killer couldn't anticipate was what would rise from the silence. Her family's persistence. Her daughter's bravery. The law's eventual reach. And the story that, instead of fading, only grew louder with time. Shelley Danishefsky Kovlin's story doesn't belong to the statistics. It belongs to the spaces in between, the hours before a new year, the seconds before a signature, the quiet between suspicion and proof. It's in those spaces that her life was stolen. But it's also where her truth survived. What makes her story unforgettable isn't just the cruelty behind it. It's the precision. She was steps away from freedom. One legal form, one signature, and the man who drained her finances, threatened her safety, and stood just across the hall would have been cut out of her life forever. He knew it. So he acted before the clock turned. But in trying to silence her, he left behind a trail of choices that never faded. He underestimated the clarity of forensic truth, the resilience of grieving parents, and the voice of a daughter growing stronger with age. Rod thought he could outrun accountability with time, religion, and lies. For a while, it worked. But Shelley's life had left too much evidence, plans made, emails sent, trust revoked. He erased her presence from the room. He could not erase her intentions. And that is what endures. Shelley is remembered not for the way she died, but for the life she was reclaiming. Her story has become a warning to others, that danger doesn't always come with noise, that some predators live behind familiar doors, and that even the most careful killers leave shadows behind. But more than a warning, hers is a story of resistance. Quiet resistance. The kind that shows up in scheduled appointments, in updated wills, in whispered phone calls, in the courage to try again. She nearly escaped. And even in death, she did not vanish. Now her story is told, not in legal files, not in whispered suspicions, but in full voice. And every time someone listens, the silence she was buried under becomes a little weaker. You've heard her now. And you carry her with you.